There's a kind of grief that no one brings casseroles for. There's no funeral, no announcement, no moment where people gather around you and say, "We're so sorry for your loss." It's the grief of the life you thought would happen but didn't. And if you're in ministry leadership, that grief often gets buried under leadership. You preach, you lead meetings, you pray for other people's pain. Meanwhile, you're quietly carrying the disappointment that no one else sees. The family you imagined, the future you prayed for, the good desire that never quite became reality. And somewhere along the way, a quiet question starts to form. Do I have the strength to keep doing this? And for some leaders, that's the moment they start thinking about hitting the eject button. Not because they don't love God and not because they don't care about people, but because the weight of what they're carrying feels invisible. So in today's conversation, I sit down with pastor and author Drew Hensley to talk about what he calls invisible grief, the pain of what has never been and may never be. And he shares his story of infertility while pastoring, the silent pressure of leading others while privately grieving, and the unhealthy ways he tried to cope before finally learning how to bring that grief honestly before God and trusted friends. So if you're a leader carrying something heavy that no one seems to see, this conversation might give you language to what you've been feeling and remind you that you are not as alone as you think. My name's Matt Davis, and this is the Life After Ministry podcast. Well, welcome, Drew Hensley. This is the Life After Ministry podcast. Good to have you here.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, we've known each other for a good 10 minutes, and
it's been a rich 10 minutes.
Man, I've loved it. It's been fantastic. Somebody sent me an email and they said, you got to look at this book. And so I looked, and for whatever reason, when the word grief or sorrow or sadness comes up, I'm like a magnet to it. And so I started looking through it, and I just thought, wow, this is interesting. Got the book, and then we reached out and said, let's talk about this, because I think that sometimes in ministry settings, and I'll even just widen that out to the ministry world, I think sometimes as Christians, it's hard to know what to do with grief, because I think we're supposed to have that joy down in our heart. And joy and grief seem to be opposed to one another. And so you wrote a book called Invisible Grief, and it's the byline is an honest conversation on the pain and loss of unrealized hopes, dreams, and good desires. And so I want to talk through a little bit of what do we do with our grief, but particularly you're a pastor, and you did not, cull this all from lots of interviews you've done over the last 50 years of ministry. This started deeply personal for you. And so I want to walk through your story, because your story is not just unique to you, that this grief piece kind of hits all of us. And so let's walk through. But before we jump into your story, I'm curious, what is invisible grief and how does it differ from visible grief?
Yeah, great question. I think invisible grief, the way that I would define it, and in the simplest way, is it is the grief of what has never been and may never be. And that can take a lot of different forms. So for our story, for my wife and I, that's infertility. For others, maybe it's, singleness, for those who desire marriage. It could honestly just be a future that you thought would be, or how things how things you thought would look, and they just didn't come to fruition. So it can take a lot of different forms, but essentially it's that grief that comes from something that hasn't really existed, but you've hoped and you've prayed and you've dreamed that it would. And I think a big difference with this is, grief, the way that we often talk about it, is a physical death, or maybe it's through divorce, the death of a relationship. And I think that people, even on the outside, clearly can see that. It's tangible. It's something where it's more seen. And it's not that it's more short term, but I think there is a difference with this invisible grief, and that a lot of times, it's a very long season, or it could be for the entirety of your life, right? And I think that brings just its own set of challenges when people don't maybe see it as clearly in you, or you don't even know what to do with it, or maybe you've been walking with it and you didn't even know how to define it. And I think there's a lot of temptations around that. Some of those can be really unhealthy or unhelpful. But that's how I would define it. The pain and loss of what has never been and may never be. And I think for a lot of people, they can find that, or they maybe have been walking with that in some way.
Did you come up with this term, invisible grief, or did you hear it from somewhere else?
I didn't hear it from somewhere else. I don't know that I've come up with it. It was something where I've heard terms of like ambiguous grief or unseen grief, things like that. For me, invisible just stuck. And this book kind of came out of when my wife and I were walking through our own form of this, looking for resources, looking for things that weren't just, we could find some things on just infertility, but we wanted a little bit broader resource, and it was just difficult to find. And so that's really where the book was born out of, that alongside just walking with, I think, a lot of other people through theirs, and that's captured in the book. And then also, I think, coming to a healthier place, even in our own story. Mm-hmm. But no, it's not something that I really heard prior to writing the book.
Can we lean in on your story? So we heard the word infertility, but
yeah.
Talk us through what that's like, just going through that as a man, as a husband, and then even as a pastor.
Yeah. So my wife and I, we had this opportunity when we were in our late 20s to move to Seattle and to join a larger church and to do church planting. And it was just this great adventure. And so we moved up there, and we had it in our minds, we want to start a family. We want to grow our family. And so we thought that would be a given. Obviously, that's a good desire. So let's go for it. And then about 9 months, a year went by, and nothing really was coming of that. And so, went and got checked out. Just, hey, let's do diligence. Let's go get tests done. Let's see if there's anything that we're missing. And so did that. And remember sitting in that doctor's office and doctor sharing Laura, my wife, her results, and they were great. Fantastic. And it was like, okay, great. But then turning to me and sharing mine, and mine were not good. And this new word came in, infertility, right? That it would be virtually impossible for us to have children. And, with that was unexpected. Grief is, you don't plan for it. So that got dropped into our laps. But there were a couple options. There was a procedure they thought might help. So, a few weeks later, went under the knife, had that procedure done, hopeful, expectant, all those things. I think even as a man, wanted to find a quick fix. Okay, this has to be fixable. Let's fix this. Especially because I already felt the weight of that. It was my test results that weren't good. And so there was a heavy weight there. That first procedure turned out it didn't work, but there was one more. So, it's like a few months later, back in the same place. And as soon as I came out of anesthesia with that one, I looked over at Laura, and, she was tearful, and the doctor just sat with us and shared that they already knew it wasn't successful. And so now this wasn't just, well, we need to figure out what to do. It's like, no, this is a new reality. And it was hard. I spent 3 years, I think, trying to run from it, run around it, run through it. And that didn't work. And that's where things kind of hit a place of finally being honest. But yeah, for me as a man, that was challenging. I felt like less than a man. I felt like I was failing my wife. I felt like I just felt a heavy weight and heavy burden. And at the same time, we were in the middle of planting this new church and caring for other people and trying to lead them well. And I think that that's a lot of weight. It's heavy. And what I found, especially those first 3 years, is that I dealt with it in very unhealthy ways. I was able to show up, and I was able to, put on a good face, and I was able to be present enough. But I think internally, I could feel the churning of this pain and not knowing exactly what to do with it, just kind of wanting it to go away. And so it did. It took about 3 years until coming to this kind of rock bottom place of, all right, this isn't working. I can't drink enough to really numb this pain. It's not going away. I can't laugh this off enough for it to get quieter. And what I found is that the more that I tried to run from it, and I think Laura would say the same thing, is that it didn't get quieter. It just got louder in different ways. But I think towards the end of that 3-year run, God was gracious and, really reminded, hey, I'm here. You're not alone in this. And so let's start walking this out in a better way.
There's a lot there. I just think, I mean, you're dealing with a lot of feelings in the aftermath of sadness and depression. There's anger, there's shame, but you all of a sudden find out like, okay, Lord, this is my thing, right? This is the thing that I'm going to have to work through. And you have to work through it with yourself first, which is hard. The disappointment because, and I got to sit with the book and read it this weekend, but your wife, not only did she want to be a mom, but just how much you convey that she would have been the greatest mom ever. And then the hard part of, when we don't deal with those things well, then we can deal with them in hazardous ways and in ways that we're compounding the problem. So for you, the alcohol piece was this way of disappearing and numbing out. I know, and I think sometimes if you're listening to this, you're likely in ministry, and so you get it. You understand that pastors are people too, right? And pastors can numb out just like anybody else. But alcohol is one of those things where you can kind of walk the line because Jesus turned water into wine, and we can find lots of license in the Bible, but there's also ways that it can be destructive, right? And so, how do you? You're compounding, right? Like you already have the initial hurt, and then you're numbing and disconnecting beyond that. What does life look like in ministry? And were you like, this is too much. I want to go drive a delivery truck or do something else that is going to be easier, so I can just kind of numb out altogether? Because ministry is one of those things. You can't just stop and do your own thing. You have to be engaged all the time. What did that look like that season?
Yeah, I think ministry on, even on a good day, if we're just being honest, there are challenges where you feel like I'm going to go drive a delivery truck. And that's just because it's this beautiful thing, right? You get to walk alongside people and speak into their lives, and you get to see amazing things and celebrate. And at the same time, you see tragic things and you mourn, and people are messy, and we're messy. And so I think during this season, absolutely. I think that one of the hardest things was not being able to have children and trying to pastor people who did have children, feeling completely inadequate and really questioning that. Like, should I even be doing this? Luckily I had some people around once I started to be honest that were like, hey, let's take care of some of these lies. Like, let us speak in. But I think when I was trying to solo mission it and kind of just put on a brave face, a lot of times I think what it looked like was almost like flipping a switch and having to be on, if you will. Like, all right, I'm going to love people. No, I wasn't completely checked out for sure, but it was like, all right, it's a Sunday or it's a Tuesday night. Like, I'm going to show up. I'm going to love these people well. And then it was just feeling completely worn out, I think, after, and having these feelings of, I don't want to see anybody, right? Like, I love that. Hey, I love that they're pregnant now and they're having kids, but we're still not. And I want all the best for them. And at the same time, man, this is just such a reminder of where we're not and what hasn't been. And so I think it was just a back and forth, right? The love for people didn't go away. I think it became more challenging to a point where I think at times I felt very dishonest. And that's probably because I was being very dishonest, not in a way that was hurting others, but in a way that I wasn't being open about what I was really feeling, what I was carrying. Even if some people knew, they didn't necessarily know the full extent or the weight of that. And so I think there's the pre and there's the post. There's the pre opening up, the pre, like, all right, we're going to be honest and face this. And I think honesty is a big word there. I think that's where it has to start. Where there's any semblance of healing that starts, I think it starts with honesty, slowing down and being honest. But I think before that, it was a lot of just kind of, it was a grind, and it was a lot of questioning self, and it was just kind of coping through it, but in a way where deep down, this can't last this way. Like, either I'm going to burn out, or I'm going to do something damaging, or I'm just going to walk away, or I'm going to have to actually like face this, and I'm going to have to actually open up with people, and I'm going to have to do what's uncomfortable. And luckily that's where it came. And that still didn't make it easy. It didn't change the circumstance, but it did change the way that I started walking through it, and my wife started walking through it. And that was big. That was transformative.
I think it's important to pay attention to, we have these triggering events in our life. And as I look over 20 plus years of being a pastor in ministry, I had 2 times where it was especially hard, right? Like I remember when my mom passed away, and I'm a children's pastor. Where that's a different kind of pastoring, right? Because I'm singing, I'm leading worship and playing songs like King Jesus is All, and I just want to punch something, right? Not a kid, obviously, but so that was hard. Like I wake up on a Sunday morning, just like I don't know if I can, like amp up enough to make this happen. And you're also not a college pastor at that point where you can kind of be raw and like get 11-year-olds don't care about how you're feeling that day, right? And then the second time was when our marriage just kind of blew up, and we went away for an emergency sabbatical for weeks. And I remember just coping. Like I was struggling so much, and it was where I found bourbon. Honestly, it was like the first time. And like, I just realized like, oh, I could take 2 shots of this stuff and I don't have to feel as like everything else doesn't feel as hard. I don't feel anything. And I realized like after going through a couple of bottles, like in a couple weeks, I just looked at my wife and I said, like, if I don't stop, if I buy another bottle, I'm not sure I'd be able to stop. And so just needing to cut that off. And you're right, like absolutely needing to feel, needing to face. But we are averse to kind of leaning into some of those things because it's a sign of weakness, or it's hard, right? It's all of those things. So how do you push through? And why does everything have to feel like such an effort, right? What was that kind of triggering point of it wasn't like all of a sudden, well, you can stop the drinking and all of a sudden you're fertile and you have a baby, right? Like, so what if that thing, and we'll get towards the end of your story in a little bit, but what if the thing that you want doesn't happen and it doesn't get fixed and now you're still there?
Yeah. Well, what we love as humans is we love, storybook endings, and we love for there to be a bow that's tied on everything in life. And I think one of the hardest things to hear, or the hardest things to face, is exactly what you just asked. What if it doesn't change? What if it doesn't necessarily get better? The circumstances don't shift. And so I think that is where, we live in a society that tells us just to keep moving forward, to power through, that essentially even that there's this over independence. You are enough. You can figure this out. You can fix it. And so we buy into that long enough. For me, I mean, it was an absolute, just like, I think it was just, I remember it. I can see it. I can see myself in my office at my house alone in the dark, just weeping. And just finally, I think saying to God, like saying it out loud to God, this isn't working. like, are you here? Do you care? Why aren't you allowing this? And I think even just speaking that honestly for the first time, like giving permission to be honest before God, I don't think we know how to lament. I mean, I think we struggle with that. And so that was a new thing for me, like actually turning to God, actually asking him these hard questions, and then coming to this place of, do I trust that he's still good, even if this doesn't come about or this doesn't change? And I think that's what lament really is. It's like turn, ask, and trust. David does it in the Psalms throughout. I think that's why we can relate with David so well. We're like, oh man, he is brutal with God. Like he's like, God, why have you abandoned me? And then he's asking these hard questions, and then he wraps up with, but I trust your promise. Like I don't necessarily understand it, but I'm going to choose to trust you. And so that was the starting point, at least for me. I knew that our circumstances as far as infertility, that's not going to go away, right? That's not changing. There's not a quick fix to that. But as you said, I think there's this temptation to, you said at the beginning, either we have to be joyful or there's grief, and those are in direct opposition.
Mm.
I think that's a lie. And I think that often what it looks like to be human is to walk through life stewarding and caring for both joy and grief, and not feeling bad for feeling one or the other, but recognizing that that is honestly a part of life. And so instead of just trying to power through with coping mechanisms, it really started to be, okay, I'm going to be honest. And I'm going to be honest in front of a therapist. I'm going to be honest in front of my wife. And then who do we have in our life that we really trust? Those 2 a.m. friends, and we're going to be honest to them. And then it kind of started to expand from there. It didn't mean that we were as open and as raw with everybody. I think there's danger in doing that too. But you do have to start to open up, and you do have to start to face what is. And I think that God is gracious in that he's already been there, but he'll remind you that he's there. And I think this is true. I mean, even what we're, the life after ministry, I think there is so much that we're just in ministry that you can be, tempted to believe that you just need to suppress or you need to minimize. Ministry's messy. And I think the longer we do that, and the longer we're not honest with ourselves, with God, and with others, the harder it is, to really care for people in a healthy way, to really move forward in a healthy way. And so I think it does. I think it starts with honesty, because honesty opens up a door to vulnerability, and vulnerability allows for what we all want the most, especially when we're hurting, and that's to be known. But it's hard. And it's not it's not like, hey, this is going to be amazing. It's like, no, this might even be more painful in some ways. But it's like, Jesus asked the man, he said, do you want to be healed? Like in his ministry. And I think that's what I felt him asking me. And I think he asks a lot of us, like, do you want to be healed? And I think we have to say, like, yes, or I'm going to keep running for a bit.
It's such a novel concept of turning to Jesus in lament, right? I don't know why, even when I was a pastor, now that I'd say I'm recovering, but he should be the first. And he very often is like, oh, maybe I should just try him. And it's a good reminder. But was there a tension for you in, like, you put a book out called Invisible Grief, and now you're known as the grief guy. I'm talking to you because you wrote a book on grief, and you're probably a great pastor and have lots of other parts of you that are redemptive and redeeming. But here we are, and you're telling a sad story again, and people like that. And I could ask the same thing, like, what are you doing? Like, is this like the world's saddest podcast, Life After Ministry? Or are you just grumbling and grieving, right? So what did you feel tension in, like, is this the thing I want to be talking about?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I even felt it, with my wife and I, as we talked through this concept and potentially writing this. And, I even asked her, I said, do you want to co-author this? And she was just very honest. She was like, no, I'm not there to do that. But if you want to write this, like, I think it could be helpful. But yeah, people have asked that too. Like, because if you write something like this and, you share, I think a book like this one, I said, if I'm gonna write this, I think I have to be incredibly vulnerable and not in a self-deprecating way. And so I didn't want to do that. And that's why I also felt like it was critically important to involve other people's stories that I had pastored or connected with, so that it wouldn't just be, oh, this is Drew's story. I didn't want that. But I knew that I'd have to be brutally honest, because grief is messy, and otherwise I don't think the book would be incredibly helpful. And it's not a 5 steps to overcoming grief. I even had somebody reach out, and they were pretty upset. They were like, I bought this book. It's not what I expected. It's not what I wanted. I don't get it. I'm like, that's okay. And as we talked more, it became clear what they wanted was 5 clean steps, right? And that's not the reality. And that's not this book. It's messy and it's all over the place. But yeah, I think you do have to come to grips with, okay, I'm putting this out there. And that opens yourself up, but it also, the types of things that people may ask you or come to you with, or even just assume, okay, yeah, and I'm happy to walk alongside people who are feeling this heavy weight. But my greatest hope in writing it was to provide not just a sad story, but something redemptive that said, hey, even if things don't change, is there hope? And not a Christian Band-Aid type hope. I hate that nonsense. I'm just like, there's no time for that here. Like, we don't need that. We don't need the cliches. I think we need to say like, okay, what does it look like, again, to walk through this with our faith intact, or even if it's teetering, even if it's, very thin, to see some semblance of hope, some semblance of God does care. We're not alone. And just to try to do that in a really honest way. So that's really, I think, why the book ended up actually getting written, is I just wanted something to be helpful in the same way that I felt like I needed it when I was in it. Because we again, this goes back to a lot of times when we think of grief, we think about death. And it's like, what about the thousands, if not millions of people that are sitting in church on a given Sunday that are grieving something that has never existed? And we may not have any idea how much pain they're experiencing. And they don't know if it's okay to open up about it. And they don't know where's a safe space. And they don't even know that this is grief that they're experiencing. And so I just wanted to give some new language that I hope is helpful to the individual, maybe helpful to the church, but just to acknowledge something that's real, even if it's not as talked about or as seen.
I think the book was great in that it wasn't, you're not using a thesaurus and trying to get big words. It was very accessible, but it's also very personal and playful at times even. So I loved, like, it wasn't, there's just so many, like, it starts to feel expected. Like, I know exactly what you're going to say next. And what I loved was that you were, it oftentimes is the things that you put in parentheses that I just thought, like, yes, okay, this is, I needed that. And that was really helpful.
You do. Yeah.
But how you've even laid it out, there's 3 parts. Give me just a quick synopsis of these 3 parts: what we lay down, what we pick up, and how we move forward, which is kind of a perfect 3-point sermon for your Sunday message, right? But it is a process-oriented way to be able to think through grief.
Yeah, that's the way that I kind of approached it. Was, that first one, it's like, we do have to lay some things down. And that sort of spins around that idea of slowing down. Okay, what have I started to believe that's not true? What if I started to minimize or suppress, or like all of those lies? I mean, there's a whole chapter on just the lies we believe, and really wrestling with, like, does God even care? And so I think that the first section is just a real wrestling. It's just a real opportunity for honesty and self-vulnerability and to examine. And then that second section, what we pick up, like picking up those things of, like, this, I mean, the identity piece was huge for me. Like I told you, like, questioning whether I should even be pastoring or not if I don't have kids. Like, what do I have to say to parents who have their, and so I think that identity piece was huge for me, of like, hey, this grief does not ultimately define you. You're not, named by just infertile. Like, you have an identity in Christ, and no matter what you do, what's done to you, or what you face, this is your truest identity. And I think that actually is transformative if we hold on to that. So it's like picking up things like that, these truths. I think a lot of it is unlearning and relearning, right? It's putting some things to death, and it's restoring some things. And so, what we pick up, and then how do we move forward, just really wanting to encourage people in the importance of gospel community. And it's not easy and it's messy, but it's critical. And walking forward, knowing that it's okay to have both joy and grief simultaneously, that they really are 2 wheels to the same bike for many. And to know that there is hope. There is this, there's heaven in our sights. And again, I try to be really careful, because it's so easy to throw that out there with people who are hurting, and just to say, well, but on the, that's just on this side of heaven. And then there's it's like, but I've got maybe like 30 years left in life that I need to live. And so to not put that out there as a cliche, but to say, like, no, what this means is that grief doesn't get the final word in your life or in the grand scheme, that God actually gets the final word. And there's great hope in that. So that's why I broke the book up that way. And I also think as I wrote it, it helped me. I think it helped me even think back through processing and think back through healing, and from what started as just a giant gaping wound start to scar over and tell a story. And what did that story tell? Ultimately, it told a story of God didn't abandon us, that I don't think any of what we walked through, even for those 7 years of infertility, was a waste. We did choose to adopt our son, Silas, who we adopted his second day of birth. We met him, and I cannot imagine a day without him. I don't know how all of that works out in God's plan and God's goodness, but I know that his goodness is there. I see it on the face of my son. And so, man, I think it really helped me reflect and remember as well. That's sort of a tangent to what you asked, but yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important that we lay down things before we pick new things up, and then we walk forward in a healthy way. And so that's what I tried to do through writing this.
It was just reminding me of a friend that we had on the podcast, Wade Joy, who wrote a book, This Dream Is Not For You. And just even talking about King David not getting to build the temple for God. And he's saying, like, I know that you've been kind of wanting this, but your son's going to do it instead. And so there are some of those pieces where we have to let those things go and trust that God knows better than us, right?
Yeah. Not easy, but I think that's where we come to, right?
Is the church good at grief? Like not just your church or the church that meets on Sunday, but the church.
No.
How do we do this better? And maybe we just leave it there. No.
No. I don't think we are, and I don't think that it's intentional though. I think that I think that culture in some way always bleeds into the church. It just does, because we are people that live out in culture. And so what I mean by that is we're so hurried and we're always moving forward. And there's, even in the church, there's a new ministry, there's a new this, there's a new that. I think it's very difficult for us to slow down. I think it's very uncomfortable for us to sit with people for a long time when there's no resolution. This was Job's friends, right? In the book of Job, they do a great job before they open their mouths. They sit with him. They're just present. But then enough time goes by and it's like, whoa, Job, like, here's some ideas, here's some thoughts. They're not helpful at all. But I think it's uncomfortable. And I think there's just a genuine, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to encourage you in this. And so sometimes we just end up saying all the wrong things, and that's unintentional. We want to be helpful. But I don't know that we as a church do a great job of making space for people who are grieving. And I don't have a perfect solution to that. But I do think that I think if you give people good language and you make them aware, and even the prologue in this book, it's all about helping the hurting. So I wrote it completely for like, hey, here's one chapter on if you are not the person who's in this, but you're walking alongside someone who is, here's what I think is helpful. But I think that the first part does honestly just start with presence. You don't have to have all the perfect words. You don't have to have a solution, but can you be present? And can you stay present? Can you keep showing up? I think not making the person's grief everything about them. Somebody told me that a couple of years ago, and it really stuck. I was walking with this guy, and he was walking through an incredibly hard season. And every week we got together for a walk, and I would automatically start with his pain. And about 4 weeks in, he's like, we can talk about other things. We can. And I was like, oh man, you're right. I'm minimizing you down to this. And so I think to just invite those who might be carrying something heavy into normal life too, and into community. But I think it's something we can grow in, and I think it takes something that we're incredibly uncomfortable with, which is slowing down and not having clean solutions.
Yeah. I have a Jewish background. I'm Jewish. And one of the things that we do when somebody dies culturally is it's called sitting Shiva. For 7 days, you just go over to their house and you sit, you weep, you mourn with those who mourn. And there is something about that. Even my mom growing up was her act of kindness was always, she made chicken soup, matzo ball chicken soup for those who were hurting. And so it is that presence and just being able to sit with people. It's incredibly helpful. And it's good for us to be able to do that. It's uncomfortable, maybe for everybody, but I think that doesn't mean, and you find when you're in a season of despair or tragedy or difficulty, you really get to find out who your friends are in those seasons, who can hang with you in those tough times, in those tough seasons, because not everybody can. And that adds this like kind of double-edged sword of like, I thought you'd be there with us in this, and you just don't have the makeup to be able to do that. You can't handle it. And that's okay. That's something to grieve also on top of the thing that you're grieving. So I'm so thankful that your story includes Silas, and you have a little letter that you wrote even to him that, you know, when he's what, 6-7 years old now?
Yeah.
Born 2019. So, you know, praying that one day, if he doesn't read the whole book, that he would at least read those couple pages that you devote to him. But even if there was no Silas, right? Like that has to be where you land, is that God is still good. Your story is still good. And in the midst of the grief of never having a Silas or whatever, that you can still be able to move on, and you and Laura would be able to be happy in the midst of all of that.
Yeah. It's, I think it's a, you know, it's a tough thing to wrestle through that. And especially, you know, if you're in the midst of this and in some form or fashion, whether it's in ministry, out of ministry, the dreams that you thought would pan out that didn't. And I think it's okay to be honest with God and say, I really struggle with this. Like, even just to tell God, I really struggle with your goodness. Just one last thing. I love what Tim Keller said back in the day, because I think it's helpful for people. He said, you know, it's not the amount of your faith. Essentially, it's the direction of your faith, or I'm butchering the quote, but essentially he's saying, like, there are going to be days and seasons where your faith just wanes and you really question maybe all of this, but it's the object of your faith. You know, at the end of the day, are you still able to say, and if not, he's still good? Sometimes there are days you just feel like Peter, when Jesus says, like, hey, do you want to go too? Do you want to leave along with everybody else who's left? And he's just like, where else would I go? And that's what it feels like sometimes. It's like, where else would I go? Like, I don't understand this, but I believe you're the best place for me to be. And I'm going to trust that you see something that I don't.
It's great. Drew Hensley, pastor at One Fellowship in Charleston, South Carolina.
Come see us.
Yeah, come by. If you're there, not only is Charleston beautiful, but sounds like it could be a great Sunday morning as well. Hey, if somebody wants to, and we're going to put the book up on our website. We have a little section we call Books We Love. And so I'm putting this up there for sure. But I'm assuming we can get it at anywhere books are sold.
You can. Yeah, you can get it anywhere books are sold. For sure. It's out there.
It's good. Drew, thanks for sharing your story. Much love to Laura and to Silas. And thank you for sharing the hope, right? This is not a bummer podcast. Hopefully what we're doing is I think this is a redemption podcast, that God is up to something good, even in the hard times. And so that's our hope, wherever you're at in whatever stage of your life and your journey, to remember the goodness of God, and that he is faithful. Even if the things don't resolve, he is good, even in the midst of the grief. And so I appreciate meeting you 45 minutes into our friendship. This is a good thing.
I appreciate you, Matt. Seriously, thanks for having me on, and thank you for what you're doing. I think for especially anybody who's, you know, on the other side of ministry, or maybe they're still into it, that none of this is wasted. None of your story is wasted. The hard parts and the easy parts and all of it. God's very much at work, and he's very much there. He sees you in it. So thanks, Matt. I appreciate it.
So one of the quiet realities of ministry leadership is that you often carry a grief while everyone else expects you to carry strength. You are the one that people come to when life falls apart. And sometimes the life that feels like it's falling apart is your own. Drew's story reminds us that grief is not a sign that you failed in ministry. You're human. And sometimes the most faithful thing a leader can do is stop pretending everything is just fine and begin telling the truth about what hurts. By the way, in safe community. Invisible grief is everywhere in the church. It lives in the quiet corners of people's stories, especially among leaders who feel like they have to keep showing up no matter what they're carrying. But grief doesn't get the final word. God does. If this conversation resonated with you, I want to encourage you to check out Drew's book, Invisible Grief. We'll link it in the show notes and on our website. We have a section called Books We Love, and they are there because they are books that we love. And if you're a leader who feels like you might be nearing that eject button moment, you don't have to figure that out alone. I encourage you to visit ministrytransitions.com. You can book a confidential call with me or anybody on our team. You can explore some of our resources, and you can find some support there for leaders who are navigating this season that we call life after ministry. Sometimes the most courageous step is not pushing through. Sometimes it's letting someone walk with you while you figure out what comes next. So thanks for listening. And until next time, this is the Life After Ministry podcast.